Anyone who follows my channel knows I'm primarily a Fallout YouTuber. However, I've always wanted to talk about other franchises. While I have my Game Talk series, where I discuss elements in games as a general subject, I have not yet made a video dedicated to any non-Fallout title. That changes with this new series, a personal favorite, where I'll discuss some fairly random games I have enjoyed over the years with little rhyme or rhythm. We'll start with an obscure one for the original PlayStation, a monster catcher called Jade Cocoon, the story of the Tamamayu. Jade Cocoon is one of those games that got overlooked as a trend follower, as well as having interesting ideas but not executed as well as they arguably should have been. For context, this game came out in 1998 in Japan and 1999 worldwide for the first PlayStation, at the height of the Pokemon boom, and naturally was labeled as a mere Pokemon clone. It's a JRPG with a nameable protagonist. You can capture and train mythical beasts, and such mythical beasts have elemental typing advantages. There are, of course, some things that it has to offer that's a bit different than its main influencer. I'll discuss its gameplay, its atmosphere and aesthetics, and finally, its narrative, along with giving some final thoughts. Let's begin. You take the role of ELPHNT, or whatever you name your protagonist, a boy coming to age, destined to become a cocoon master. As one, your job is to catch and purify minions, the beast of the forest, using empty cocoons, just normal silk cocoons, which is fitting given that a lot of these beasts do take a giant bug-like appearance. But rather than chucking the cocoons at your minions, you play a flute to magically pacify the beasts and imprison them in their new home, represented by glowy glowiness. If you capture them, you get firefly cocoons, which simply means you have filled unusable cocoons. You have to go to Mabu, your newlywed wife, and have her use her powers to purify them, and turns the fireflies into white cocoons, which just means you would now have a usable minion, though you'll have to equip them to your party. And said party can only have 3 of them, rather than the 6 from Pokemon. Visiting Mabu also resets the amount of empty cocoons you have back to 12, which is the max you're allowed to carry throughout the entire game. Besides not having to buy cocoons and getting refills via the purification process, the battling and capturing is pretty much how you would play Pokemon. You beat the crap out of a minion, get their health low, and use an elemental rock paper scissors, all in a tip to shove a minion into a cocoon. There are differences, which is the part I'll mainly be focused on. While it's now become normal for mainline Pokemon games, you can actually see the monsters out in the wild. Some of the minions may charge at you, some will flee you, and some will mind their own business. Though if your capture level is about 3 or 4 spots above the creature's level, some of the aggressive ones may not want to deal with you at all and try to run away. This gives some amount of personality to specific types of creatures, such as the ones who will only try to come after you if you have your back turned, kind of like a Boo from the Mario series. It's still really easy to accidentally tap a minion into a counter, despite how passive they may be, given the really narrow pathways. At least you can see it coming. I guess it's arguably better than. On the subject of narrow paths, we have to discuss the basic control and management. One of the most annoying aspects of the game is the tank controls. Think Resident Evil, top off with that style of camera placement. It's functional. It doesn't get in the way too terribly much given it's a fairly linear game with turn-based combat, and colliding with a barrier kinda course-corrects you. Nevertheless, it's fairly inconvenient, especially for players of more modern games who may never had to experience this method of movement before. The most prominent and interesting feature is the ability to combine caught creatures together. This isn't like your typical gacha game style of merging that's pretty common on mobile devices. It actually fuses the elemental abilities and types together. It also combines their bodies. One creature's form acts as a base and the other as a secondary. The secondary creature's texture will be infused into the base creatures. It'll also mix certain physical features together, such as perhaps a tail or a wing, as well as scaling parts of the body. The end result can be some rather funky looking minions, and this is my absolute favorite aspect of the game. As a wee lad, I spent hours trying to come up with some of the most horrific or coolest looking monsters I could form. Though it doesn't always empower the creatures, some mixes can lower specific stats at the base while raising others. Personally, I just aim for good enough and getting some nice elemental abilities. Speaking of elements, while Pokemon has a ton, Jade Cocoon really only has the 4 main ones: water, fire, air, and earth. It keeps things pretty simple, but the merging aspect of various proficiencies in the 4 does add some variety. And given the elements work off a percentage system, it's entirely possible to start off with a creature of one element, say fire, and merge it with a series of another element, say earth, enough to completely wipe out the fire element. There would be little point in doing so, but you can. And it should be noted that how proficient a creature is in one or another element does impact the typing advantages and disadvantages of such moves. A creature who only has half proficiency in water will not pack as much of a punch as a one that had a full water typing when doing a water-based move. Of course, merging means you are creating a new species, more or less, so you may want to keep rare monsters as pure. For instance, the very first creature you catch a tutorial mission isn't readily available in any other part of the game, whether that's Arpatron or Batoka if you're using the Pocket Station. There are other minions that are related, even some of the same elements such as Radgor, a water-based dragon like Arpatron, being available in the Spider Forest. Though Radgor doesn't have all the same benefits as Arpatron, so you may want to keep Arpatron as a base if you merge them. Personally, I prefer to keep them pure and level them up in the classic animal fighting way. Speaking of levels, because of the merging system, monsters do not evolve like those in Pokemon, but they do grow larger as they get stronger, maturing and getting more powerful as the level increases. And it's actually a rather noticeable effect, and it's pretty cool. So while there's no doubt that minions are exceptionally powerful in the main way the player will do battle, they're not the only ones capable of dealing damage. You, the player, can also square up with various creatures. Knife, sword, spear, you can smack a creature around yourself. Though you're not as powerful as they are, you'd be far outclassed after the first level, the Beat of Forest. But you can smack a beast with a sword. Still, despite you being able to fight creatures, you do not want to kill them as a ELPHNT. There's no benefit in doing so, emphasized by their capture level system. I mentioned the capture level earlier and how some creatures will react to it if it's too high above their level. Thing is, it doesn't give you points in the attack or defense of the player at all. Heck, you'll always be the same 100 points of health, though you can get items that actually do adjust your attack and defenses. If you kill, you'll want to use a creature for it. They're the only ones who benefit. The capture level is purely about how good the player is at being able to capture minions. As you level, your song will change and your ability to imprison creatures improves. 2 or 3 levels above a minion and you can sometimes yoink them from the forest without a fight. This system does emphasize that the Cocoon Master is a beast trainer, not a warrior. Something the game tells us a few times.
But remember, the mission of the Cocoon Master is not to kill, but to soothe souls.
You capture, train, and merge. Oh yeah, not only can you partake in animal cruelty, but also poaching. You don't simply capture creatures for combat, you can spin their cocoons into silk to be sold. Yeah, you basically just kill them and turn their body into clothing material for profit. Mabu's prayer basically says as much.
O warrior of justice, return to whence thee came, to the place of Elrum. Grant us our daily bread.
Meet your god to give us money. Which is slightly less grim than the other version of this prayer, which basically says, life sucks and then you die.
Shall they ever know good fortune? Those who fight for what is right, never shall they return to Elrum.
Though you may not need to spend much money throughout the game, you'll find items on the ground, random drops, and be given goods as part of the story. Weapons, armor, healing items. Still, there are plenty of goodies you can of course buy from the local shop like any other RPG. Speaking of the shop or any location really, most of the town locations are small maps that you access through a menu list, rather than the more popular open world or pseudo-open world style. It does give you a taste of the game's atmosphere, but it may be considered the less fun method. But since we mentioned atmosphere, here's a segue. Traveling around the world, you can get a fair bit of feel for it. You can learn the personalities of the people, learn some historical and religious lore, a good amount with voice dialogue. A lot of which is actually pretty decent voice work for a game that came out in the late 90s. Don't get me wrong, it's not fantastic, but okay for the time. Part of this is because the voice cast for the title actually has some professional voice actors, although admittedly this will be early on in their career. While the graphical limitations of the original PlayStation hardware does hold the game back by modern standards, the character designs are quite appealing. We get a good look at them thanks to the character portraits, but also the opening animation. The sequel starts off with a narrative, somewhat vague mythical history of the land, followed by a Studio Ghibli animation for a bit of a preview. Specifically, Katsuya Kondo was a character designer, which if you watch something like Kiki's Delivery Service, you'll notice a very similar aesthetic. I'm going to let it play for a bit because it's pretty good, but if you're interested in skipping, there are timestamps. really this would have worked as an anime series or movie. It's just that good. Not only is the opening animation and character designs excellent, so are the designs of the monsters. They're all rather creative and broad, even if there's a fair bit of color swapping and assets reuse going on. In addition, the music is really gravitating. Beautiful pieces that really puts you in the moment. Some that enchant you with thoughts of the magical forest, mythical powers of the unknown, and slow, melancholic pieces. Finally, the physical world is thought-provoking, if archaic in game design. Pre-rendered backgrounds and a fixed camera are a product of a bygone era, but this ancient mystical forest with the ruins of Gehanapali does play heavily into the favor of appealing to my sense of wonder. Combined with the music, it does well for capturing the mood. Even the town of Cyrus is quite charming, with the designs of many homes and buildings that takes inspiration from ancient times. The world feels alive even with the limited technology, but the Warden Lord is perhaps the most fleshed out aspect of Jade Cocoon. The player, ELPHNT, gets to witness some laws and customs of the village he lives in. One aspect I enjoy is learning how dependent on silk farming they are, really tying up the whole idea of cocoons. ELPHNT, as the son of Cocoon Master, is destined to become one himself. Inherited profession is the practice of Cyrus. He is betrothed to a Nagi woman, as all Cocoon Masters are. His wife-to-be, the already mentioned Mabu. Cyrus comes after her attack by divine beasts of the forest, specifically the Onibubu, locusts of the apocalypse that puts many villagers into a deep sleep, and is stopped by the oldest Nagi woman, Mother Garai. However, she can't do anything about the slumbering people, but there is a rumor of an herb that may be able to help. ELPHNT is really the only available Cocoon Master that could do something for the village after the disappearance of his father, so he's sent off to deal with it. He's got to capture monsters, murdering them, and using them to battle other monsters while tracking down this fabled herb to save his village. Now, before I continue, I want to take a moment to warn you about future spoilers. Timestamps are on the screen and marked on the timeline and in the description to avoid spoilers if you're thinking about playing the game, but I will be spoiling rather important moments of the game, including the ending. So, ELPHNT meets the spirit of the forest, some of which don't have the highest opinion of people. And back home, others are scared for the future of Cyrus. The Nagi people face heavy discrimination, and desperation grows more and more. To top it off, the Nagi Beast purification ritual tires the women and creates scars. Her assisting you, helping you save Cyrus, is hurting her, marking her so visibly as a member of the people that many Cyrus villagers fear or look down upon. Mabu will dress in more molded clothing to cover her wounds. The story really lays out a much bleaker look at the world than perhaps what other Pokemon-like games offer. Loss of loved one, practice of dehumanization for a specific group of people, and terrified governing entities. It really gets ramped up by the second half of the game, where the chief order used to capture ELPHNT, the god of the forest, who takes the form of a mighty tree. Then Mother Garai, who originally saved Cyrus from the Onibubu, is tied down by the governing body, who decides to sacrifice her. It gets revealed that Garai is a reincarnation of the goddess of death, and starts to prophesize time of gathering. More specifically, she's the one who spends souls to make new ones, and literally rips out the souls of every villager and takes them to ELPHNT. Even ELPHNT's mother, who is also a Nagi woman. Only he and Mabu are alive. This moment, where the souls are spun, is a rather melancholic scene, where you can walk around the village and witness everyone in their final moments, with a somber tune playing in the background, all turned to stone, in a chrysalis between life and death. As melancholic as it may be, it's unlikely to make even the most emotional hearts cry. After all, many of these villagers berated you and insulted your family, but it could definitely make you go, well, damn. While Mabu is alive, she is now a fairy. This may seem odd, but it's actually rather fitting when you study up on the age of religious tales. Mabu is still metamorphosizing and will die once it's complete. She needs to survive in a cocoon to slow down the change and prolong her life. I don't know if it makes a ton of sense considering creatures use cocoons in metamorphosis, but whatever, it's magic. ELPHNT travels with her cocoon and enters a Nagi temple and begins a series of trials. From here on, he revisits old territory, well, the netherworld version of such territories, which is really just a recolored version of the levels. And you'll come across demonically possessed characters where you'll fight the evil spirits in question to calm them down. Everything at this point feels oddly alien. Friends spitting fire at you, your village pretty much wiped out, and your wife in a hopeless state. And eventually you'll fight the Chosen One of Darkness. Beating him results in a fairly predictable outcome. He's revealed to be your father. Surprise, right? You fulfill a prophecy to save the village. After that, the game pretty much ends rather abruptly. You can continue playing by going through the Eternal Corridor, which is 1,000 stages of copy and pasted levels, where you just repeat the gameplay loop of battling, catching, and merging. At the end of each level, there's a boss type minion guarding the gate to the next level, and after the 1000 corridor, if you do make it that far, you just go back to corridor 999. Not exactly rewarding. Sadly, this game is rather short, but the journey can be a lot of fun. Ultimately, Jade Cocoon could be summarized as something that has a very simple gameplay style, rather easy combat with little complexity to it. However, it features one mechanic that stands out, the merging system. Where the title does exceptionally well is the world, atmosphere, and lore. It's not stellar. Its gameplay is very archaic, it has a predictable storyline, it reuses a lot of assets very noticeably, and there's a lot of exposition that may make most people with little patience groan, especially in the beginning. It's a while before the game actually starts becoming a game. But still, I really do love Jade Cocoon. Part of that is definitely nostalgia, I will admit to that bias. But even replaying it today, I find enjoyment in what the game does quite well. I would personally like to see Jade Cocoon get a breath of fresh air into it, a remake or reimagining, though certain changes would need to be made, largely in control, length of the title, and more content overall. New items, new minions, at least 2 more elements, and some changes to the story could do wonders for the game. Sadly, for many players, even those of you who are watching it now and actually are interested, a remake would honestly be about the only way some could play. This title has fell into such obscurity that when it was re-released onto the PlayStation Network, it was only for Japan. It never got a re-release anywhere in the West, and buying a copy is going to cost you a pretty penny. There are no other legal options to go with, and any hypothetical though unlikely future release for the West really should fix the scaling for higher resolutions. Doing so in an emulated environment really can make the models look a lot better on modern devices, which really does add a lot to the design of the monsters and make specific details of characters a lot more noticeable. But it utterly breaks the health, mana, and experience bars graphically. Under an official release, this could be fixed, giving you the best of both worlds. Still, such is unlikely to ever happen. It's a shame too, because I think this game is really worth at least one playthrough if you enjoy monster catchers. And that was Jade Cocoon, a game from my childhood that didn't get much attention. It has a small following, there's people who really enjoyed it, but its legacy will likely stay as nothing more than a commercial failure. And if you stuck around, thank you. I know this isn't Fallout, but I always wanted to expand, and I thought having a series of videos about my personal favorite games would be a good way to start.